The Seahawks elevated a pair of veterans off the practice squad for Sunday's opener against the Rams. Why are Artie Burns and John Rhattigan the choice coming up for Seattle in Week 1? I'll be breaking it all down on a bonus edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Happy season opener eve. I'm so excited I can't even speak tonight. Seahawks getting ready to face the Rams at Lumen Field tomorrow. Both NFC West rivals looking to get off to a fast start. Much anticipated games, some major debuts for rookies on both sides, including Jackson Smith in Jigba. There will be one rookie that's not going to be out there. I'll be breaking that down here in a few moments, but the Seahawks made a couple of moves elevating veterans from the practice squad to the active roster for tomorrow's game. We'll dive into why the Seahawks made the decisions they did on that front. There's a couple of different possibilities to consider there, and I'm going to be looking at where the Seahawks have the biggest advantages heading into this game. They are considered the favorites, 5.5-point favorite by the spread. They're the playoff team, returning playoff team. The Rams coming off a rough season, a difficult offseason where they lost a lot of players. But I'm going to be looking at where the Seahawks have the biggest advantages. One set of advantages on offense and defense. We'll get to that on this bonus episode. But first, let's look at what the Seahawks did today. This is going to be something we should expect week in, week out with the practice squad rules that were changed during COVID. They expanded to 16 players. You could elevate up to 2 players each week. The Seahawks continue to take advantage of that. As far as the moves that they made today, Artie Burns and John Rhattigan being the 2 veterans that were elevated. This shouldn't necessarily come as a surprise because both of these players were actually on Seattle's initial 53-man roster. And then one day later, both of them were waived to allow Blue Kelly and Drake Thomas, who were claimed off waivers, to be added to the roster. As far as reasons behind moving these 2 players up, Pete Carroll mentioned this after Artie Burns was on the practice squad, that he was going to be up soon. Turns out that's exactly the case. And some are going to say this means Devin Witherspoon isn't playing. I think that could be a possibility. In fact, if I had to make a prediction right now, based on where things stand with Artie Burns coming up, they played him some of the nickel in the preseason finale in Green Bay. If I had to hedge bets now, I would say that Devin Witherspoon, it's probably a 75-25 proposition. He is not playing in this game tomorrow. I think that they would like to give him one more week on the practice field before they have him play against the Detroit Lions, who, if you saw on Thursday night, they're ready to compete. The Lions are going to be one of the most improved teams in the NFC after just missing the playoffs last year. That's going to be a really tough road game that you would like to have all of your hands on deck. So they're not overlooking the Rams, but I think that this could definitely be a case where Devin Witherspoon is not playing. But there's another thing to consider here. Devin Witherspoon and Artie Burns could both be dressing for this football game very easily. And the biggest reason why, Blue Kelly and Drake Thomas, in particular Kelly at the cornerback position, they've been on the team less than 2 weeks. They have not had much time. It has been a crash course. They didn't get to play in the preseason games. They're coming from other organizations where they were running different playbooks. Those 2 are probably not ready to play in this football game, and they're going to be among the 6 players that are inactive. It'd be surprising if they're not. And so with Blue Kelly not being ready, Artie Burns being the natural fit, he knows this defense inside and out. He's played special teams. He can now play some inside, as he showed in that game against Green Bay. He brings you some positional flexibility and a ton of starting experience. So I wonder if that may be a bigger reason than just Devin Witherspoon maybe not being available tomorrow, that they want to have that insurance, a veteran insurance policy, in case Devin Witherspoon can only play a handful of snaps. If he doesn't play at all, you want to have that other player that can step in and has played a lot of snaps in the NFL. And I think John Rhattigan, you can look at it as the same way, but on special teams. They've got Jordan Brooks, Bobby Wagner, Devin Bush, all going to be playing tomorrow. So the Seahawks don't necessarily need to add another linebacker. That's not necessarily the concern there, although having John Rhattigan available in case one of those guys goes down during the game, you hope it doesn't happen. But Rhattigan is a player that has played a lot of snaps now in the preseason. He hasn't had any defensive snaps in a regular season game, but he's been an excellent special teams player for this team. Had 10 tackles a couple years ago before he got hurt. Last year in just 5 games, had 5 special teams tackles. So he's one of Seattle's very best special teams players. And so bringing him up, not a surprise. Drake Thomas may be a player that has a chance to fill that kind of a role. But again, like Kelly, he's literally been in Seattle for less than 2 weeks. He's trying to figure things out. His head's spinning, most likely, trying to learn another playbook after spending all of the preseason and training camp with the Raiders. So those guys eventually the Seahawks are hoping can contribute. But again, I'd be really surprised if they're not playing in this game. So I think that is probably the biggest reason that these two guys are getting called up from a position standpoint. And Devin Witherspoon's injury is part of the reason Artie Burns is up too. Even if he does play in this game tomorrow, probably not going to be playing a ton of snaps. You want to get maybe a preseason type environment for him where he's getting some defensive snaps, but you're not going to throw him in and have him play every single snap tomorrow against the Rams when he had been out since August 7th. He's still been limited at practice this week. So I'm leaning 75-25 on that front, and Artie Burns coming up certainly gives them the flexibility where they're going to have another proven veteran. If they have to play him in the slot or on the outside, they can do that. And they can afford to give Devin Witherspoon another week to make sure that he is ready to go against the Detroit Lions in week 2. So we'll see what happens. Maybe Witherspoon ends up dressing for this game and plays some snaps. We'll just have to wait and see. But you're going to see Artie Burns. You're going to see John Rhattigan out there with both those players being elevated for the practice squad. And they had strong preseasons. I felt like Artie Burns had the better preseason of the two players, but Rhattigan had a ton of tackles. His best game was definitely against Green Bay in the 3rd preseason game. Seemed like he was able to get rolling a little bit after a tough first game against the Vikings where he missed a lot of tackles. So both these guys will be available for the Seahawks tomorrow. I anticipate special teams, maybe some defense for Artie Burns. We'll have to wait and see whether Witherspoon's active. They could certainly play Burns inside some if they want to, but again, it's another really good insurance policy for them. Up next, I'm going to be taking a look at where the Seahawks have the biggest advantage going into this opener against the Rams. They're the favorite. There's a lot of talent on both sides of the football, but where do the Seahawks clearly have the edge and position groups that they can take advantage of to win this game and start off 1-0? I'll be diving into that here in a moment on our Saturday bonus edition of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by our friends over at Game Time. If you've ever been on the hunt for sports or concert tickets at the last minute, such as when I was looking for Kraken playoff tickets in Colorado, that process can be anxiety-provoking. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful, though. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. If you're wanting to see the Seahawks tomorrow against the Rams at Lumen Field and have an itch for putting together a last-minute road trip to Seattle, using Game Time's awesome flash deals feature and a detailed stadium map, you can find awesome seats right now for under $85, and it's super easy. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event, and the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Terms apply. You're listening to the bonus Saturday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to all the 12s out there, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. In this case, 6 days a week with this extra episode. We greatly appreciate it. The Seahawks getting ready to battle the Los Angeles Rams week 1 at Lumen Field, NFC West matchup, much anticipated contest. Even though the Rams are going into this season with much lower expectations than they've had in recent years, they lost a lot of players in free agency. They've still got Matthew Stafford. They've still got Aaron Donald and a handful of players from that Super Bowl team a couple years ago. And most importantly, like with Seattle with Pete Carroll, they've got Sean McVay. They've got one of the best head coaches in the NFL, which that is a big difference maker when you're a team that has that much turnover. And they're expecting to come in and have a very competitive game against the Seahawks on the road. And that's really been the way it's been in this series, except for that 142-7 drubbing a few years ago where the Rams came into Lumen Field and absolutely annihilated the Seahawks. These games have typically been extremely close. So I'm looking for this game to go down to the wire, just like the two games did last year, even with all the injuries. The Rams always play the Seahawks tough. But let's look at where the Seahawks have the biggest advantages. We've talked about individual matchups leading up to this game, and obviously Aaron Donald, he is the biggest advantage for the Rams going to this game. Even with Seattle thinking they have an upgraded interior offensive line with Evan Brown and Phil Haynes, the new starters at center right guard, that's still number 99. That's Aaron Donald over there. That is clearly the biggest advantage that the Rams have going into this game on either side of the football. But one of them is obvious and one not so much when you look at where the Seahawks have an edge going into this game. And the one that's obvious, you look on the offensive side of the football, there's been all these goofy Twitter posts, these fake reports about DK Metcalf saying he doesn't know any of the Rams defensive backs. But you look at that secondary right now, they've got a ton of inexperience. Maybe the most notable name that they've got at corner or safety right now is Devin Witherspoon, who was in Seattle for about 5 minutes before they traded him to the Pittsburgh Steelers a couple years ago. So he's a familiar name. He played for the 49ers, so he's played a lot against the Seahawks and DK Metcalf. But you go away from that. Darian Kendrick last year started a handful of games as a rookie. Kobe Durant, their slot corner, another rookie a year ago that started quite a few games and had some really good games for the Rams. He was one of their few bright spots last year. But this is a very young secondary that had some trouble with the Seahawks last year. Jalen Ramsey was out there to provide some support, obviously, too. He's not going to be there tomorrow now in Miami and opening the season injured for the Dolphins. But you look at this young secondary that the Rams have, Witherspoon being the elder statesman at 28 years of age on the outside. Witherspoon's actually had some decent games against DK Metcalf a few years back when the 49ers were playing the Seahawks in the regular season finale. Seattle won that game in Glendale during the COVID season, but 3 targets for Metcalf with Witherspoon on him, didn't catch any of those passes. So there is a track record where Witherspoon's been decent against DK Metcalf, but when he has had to defend Tyler Lockett, it's been another story. Lockett has owned him with a couple touchdowns working against him. Last year, Kendrick, in the one game that he played for the Rams against the Seahawks, 5 targets, allowed 5 receptions, and 3 of those were first downs. Kobe Durant gave up 2 first downs to Cade Johnson in the season finale, 3 first downs overall. So those guys are better players now. They've had another full off season. They're going into year number 2, and the Rams are certainly high on it, particularly Durant. He's a player that they think has a chance to be a breakout standout for them this season after flashing last year. But this is still an area when you have Metcalf, you have Lockett, and now you got Jackson Smith and Jigba. If you had trouble with Cade Johnson end of the year last season, Kobe Durant, we're going to introduce you to Jackson Smith and Jigba. And we've got Jake Bobo if you're looking for a totally different style receiver that can also play in the slot. And even Cody Thompson. All 3 of those guys can play in the slot or outside. And so it creates even more issues. The Seahawks should be full strength at the receiver position tomorrow. And while the Rams have some young guys that they're excited about, that should be one of the clear areas that the Seahawks have a major advantage going into this game. And Geno Smith, I don't want to say he should be licking his lips because the Rams are going to be well coached. They've got a lot of talent, a lot of quickness back there, but it's inexperienced talent in that secondary. So this should be a big advantage for Seattle. Now, as far as the other advantage, I've kind of had to come around with this over the week. But the more film that I've watched, the more numbers that I've looked at, one of the reasons that the Rams really struggled last year, when you take the injuries out of the equation, the quarterback position particularly, the offensive line was one of the worst in the NFL. And you look at what the Rams have coming back this season. Joseph Noteboom is going to be their left tackle. He's coming off a significant injury. He is not Andrew Whitworth either. He is one of the experienced guys that they have on this line. Steve Avila, who is a rookie out of TCU, a second rounder they're really excited about, but he hasn't played any NFL snaps. This is going to be his debut. Brian Allen is a solid center when healthy. He's coming off of an injury-marred season. And at the right guard spot, this is where I really think the Seahawks should have an advantage. Tremaine Akram, I believe I pronounce it Ankrum. Tremaine Ankrum, who is a former 7th-round pick out of Clemson. He has played 5 snaps in regular season games over the last 3 years, and he is going to be starting at the right guard spot for the Rams. That should be a clear area the Seahawks can circle and say, we have got to take advantage of that. So my other big advantage for the Seahawks going into this game, I don't know that I'm going to be able to say this about a lot of games for the Seahawks. We have to wait and see how this rebuilt defensive line performs as the year progresses. But this is a game where I feel like the front 5, your defensive line, should have a major advantage against the Rams. On the outside, especially where Joseph Noteboom was at, I think Uchenna Nwosu, Boy Mafe, a now healthy Darrell Taylor, Derek Hall, those guys should be able to consistently win as pass rushers working against Joseph Noteboom. And in the interior, Draymond Jones, Jaron Reed, Mario Edwards, Miles Adams, a player that I think is going to be playing a lot more snaps than people realize, has a chance for a breakout 4th season with the Seahawks. All those guys in the interior, when you're dealing with guys that don't have experience. Steve Avila is a solid football player that I think is going to have a very long career in the NFL, but he's making his debut at left guard, and he isn't the most athletic guy. I think Seattle's more undersized defensive tackles could give him a lot of problems rushing the passer, collapsing the pocket. Brian Allen has had up and down performance in his career against the Seahawks as well. And Ankrum at the right guard spot, he's really the wild card here. We've got 5 snaps to work off of. His preseason has been solid, but this is the regular season. It's a totally different rodeo. And I'm just interested to see how the Seahawks are able to take advantage of that, because you've got 2 guards that have played 5 total NFL regular season snaps. Brian Allen is a solid center, but that should be a big advantage. And I feel like the Seahawks edge rushers, that this should be a game that they can have success working to get the Rams tackles, particularly Joseph Noteboom on the left side. And so I actually think the D-line on defense, that might be where the Seahawks have the most notable edge, because I think the Rams still have some decent receivers, even without Cooper Kupp. Tutu Atwell has 4.2, legitimate 4.2 speed, a guy that can take the top off a defense. Van Jefferson has had some really good games. Puka Nacua coming out of Washington and BYU, he's more of that intermediate receiver that could fill the Cooper Kupp void, and he had a strong preseason as well. They've got some weapons there to go against the Seahawks secondary that isn't completely at full strength. So I think the defensive line for Seattle, with Draymond Jones and Mike Morris maybe even fitting into this equation in his NFL debut, Miles Adams, Jaron Reed, I like that group in this matchup, particularly as pass rushers. We'll see how they hold up in the run game, and Steve Avila is really good at moving guys off the ball, so that could be the advantage that he has going into his NFL debut. But I like this matchup as a whole for Seattle's defensive line, and I feel like they can win the line of scrimmage. Now, we'll see what happens. This is really the biggest question mark for the Seahawks with all the moves they made after finishing 30th in run defense a year ago. But you look at the numbers that this offensive line put up. I don't know how much better that offensive line for the Rams is going to be. And there's a few spots I wonder if it might take another step back this year with some of the players they have in the lineup. To me, that is a major mismatch that the Seahawks have to capitalize on. And if they're not able to, and Matthew Stafford is able to have time to work in the pocket, then this could be a game that ends up being much more competitive and trickier to win than what maybe it's expected to be going into tomorrow's matchup. But we'll have to wait and see. I just think that this defensive line, this might be one of the few games this year where you go into the game thinking, against that offensive line, this defensive line should be able to feast. I like the matchup for the Seahawks going into tomorrow's game. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you're listening to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow after the game, I've got it scheduled for 6 o'clock Pacific time, maybe a few minutes after that, depending how long interviews go after the game. I'll be breaking down everything that went down in the season opener, handing out game balls, and of course, 3 up, 3 down. Don't want to miss it. Make sure that you're listening in. Thanks for joining tonight on this bonus episode, and go Hawks.